Hi, I'm Jordan the Nerd of Gold, and today is day 24 out of 52 of me trying to answer at least 52 questions associated with DC Comics as I count down to my birthday. Help me reach 1,000 followers before that point, like and share. So I'm going to answer this question right here about the question. So the question is a great supporting character. I have a lot of love for him. I will admit that he's not one of my favorite characters, but here's what I'm going to say about where to start with him. There's really only one place to start. So covering a little bit of his history, Steve Ditko, the co-creator of Spider-Man, originally came up with a character called Mr. A at a different comic company that no longer exists. And basically, he was hired by Charlton Comics to work on their superhero line later, and one of the characters he developed beyond Blue Beetle was the Question, and the Question is basically a toned down version of Mr. A. Now the reason this is important is because Mr. A was basically a cartoon where Steve Ditko got to express all his beliefs about objectivism. And if you don't know what objectivism is, don't look it up. It's terrible. Don't look it up. But yeah, objectivism sucks. If you disagree about that, I don't really care. Go argue with the wall. Yeah. So the Question exists for about 4 issues in the backup tales of the Blue Beetle comic, and then there's like an annual where some stories are collected because the Blue Beetle comic didn't last very long and it gets collected. But basically there's nothing after that until DC Comics buys out Charlton Comics, and then in the mid 80s or the late 80s after Crisis on Infinite Earth, we get the real series that the Question is actually known for and people like, oh, this is what we want out of the Question. And it's Denny O'Neil's and Dennis Cowan's The Question from the 1980s. This is where the Question is a detective, but it's also keeping in line with Steve Ditko's it's also about philosophy kind of deal. It's very much a philosophical detective story in the same vein as like maybe True Detective, although that's not necessarily the best comparison, but you kind of get what I mean when I say detective story with a heavy dose of philosophy. That's kind of the same thing, but it's much more, he gives a Zen-like philosophy that's very different from his original like objectivist kind of philosophy. So it's a great change for the character on that front. And then after that, he becomes a regular supporting character in like Batman and Justice League, and that's where we get him in the Justice League show. And he continues to be a great character until he dies, and his title is taken over by Renee Montoya, who was a detective introduced over in the Batman comics and was a primary character in Gotham Central before she became the Question. But yeah, you can go to the 1980s run of the Question by Denny O'Neil, the legendary guy who revitalized Batman, Green Arrow, and Green Lantern for a 2-for-1 on there, and just became the master editor of Batman comics from the late 80s until I think the early 2000s is when he finally left as the main editor of Batman comics. He was hugely influential. He's one of the legendary creators at DC Comics who like influenced multiple characters and multiple generations of characters. So Denny O'Neil's run on the Question is the title to read. And if you want more than that, you can read some stuff that came out later in the 2000s. There's also a comic that's about to come out by Gabriel Hernandez Waltz, if I'm remembering his name correctly. I'm sorry if I'm not. And then the Renee Montoya stuff is good because you got Greg Rucka writing on that. And then I'm trying to remember what else is there good to suggest about the Question. I think that's it off the top of my head. But yeah, I hope you have fun with that.